At the end of this year, 2022, the Hyundai Veloster N will no longer be with us. May it rest in peace. But taking its place is this brand new 2022 Hyundai Elantra N and this 2022 Hyundai Kona N. So is the Elantra and the Kona worthy of the N badge? Well, let's go for a drive and find out. Just like the Veloster N, both the Elantra N and the Kona N get the exact same powertrain. It is still a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, which produces 1 extra horsepower because the turbine inlet is slightly bigger with the Elantra N and the Kona N than it is for the Veloster N. So the output is 276 horsepower and 289 pound-feet of torque. That's the power that you get most of the time. However, if you push this little red button on the steering wheel with NGS written on it, then you get an additional 10 horsepower. It's an overboost function just like how you get in Porsche vehicles, some of them at least. However, this extra 10 horsepower only lasts for 20 seconds. After that, there is a 40-second cooldown period. But if you don't use the full 20 seconds, then you can still push it again and have the remainder time before hitting that cooldown period. Pushing the NGS button will also downshift the transmission to its lowest possible gear. So for example, let's say you're cruising in 7th gear. As soon as you push it, the transmission downshifts to the lowest possible gear, which in my case was 2nd. But if you're in manual mode, then the transmission will obviously not downshift. It'll remain in whatever gear you are in. And also, I should mention that this NGS mode is not available with the Elantra if you get it with the manual transmission. It's only available on this automatic, the 8-speed dual clutch. Speaking of which, the Kona N is only available with an 8-speed dual clutch, and this transmission is really good. It's nice and smooth to change gears when you're just driving around town or on highways. It's quick to react if you put your foot down, like so. Or if you want to use the paddle shifters on the steering wheel or on the gear selector itself, if you want to move it forwards and backwards. I was about to say roll your own gears, but no, that's with the manual, and that's only in the Elantra, not the Kona N. There's also a few other things that this transmission can do. For example, if you're on a racetrack, then you can activate an track sense, in which case the transmission will, for lack of a better word, sense the braking zones, and it will automatically downshift without you needing to do so. So that way it lets you focus on the braking zones and your cornering line and so on. It also has N power shift, so when you're in N mode and you apply 90% or more throttle, then there is no reduction in engine torque. Coupled with launch control and this dual clutch transmission, the Hyundai Elantra N can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 5.3 seconds, and the Hyundai Kona N can do it in 5.5 seconds. These are Hyundai's claimed times. Other publications have managed to get it lower than that, and I'm sure some owners that are watching right now can probably get lower than that too. But unfortunately, I do not have access to a wide open track or a specialist timing equipment. But from behind the steering wheel, it definitely feels fast. Both of them do. And speaking of going fast, this engine is very punchy. Like many other modern turbocharged engines, peak torque is right around the 2000 mark, and it's sustained all the way to the mid-rev range. Peak power is pretty close to the red line, but in this Elantra N and also the Kona N, it's actually sustained for about 500 RPMs. It's not just one peak, it's a peak, bit of a flat curve, and then it tapers down. Plus, would you just listen to this engine? Sounds good with the valves open. However, if you close the valves, then it kind of sounds like, I don't know, a vacuum cleaner. Doesn't sound too good. It's better with the valves open. You get those crackles and pops and bangs with upshifts. Though the Elantra N is lighter than the Kona N, it's actually the Kona that gets better fuel economy ratings in a city when comparing these two cars with their automatic transmissions. The 2022 Elantra N DCT is rated for 12.1 liters per 100 kilometers in a city and 7.9 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway. The 2022 Kona N DCT is rated for 11.8 liters per 100 kilometers in a city and 8.7 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway. However, with the manual transmission, the Elantra N is rated for 10.9 liters per 100 kilometers in a city and 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway. During my time with these cars, I averaged 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers in the Elantra N and 10.7 liters per 100 kilometers in the Kona N. So it is a little bit backwards compared to their official fuel economy ratings, but both of them were still pretty decent for the amount of power that they produce. Now you can't just add on all of this extra power to both of these cars and not do anything to the brakes or the suspension. And thankfully, Hyundai has not skimped on either of those two areas. Both of the cars have larger discs. They measure 14.2 inches on the front and 12.4 inches on the back. They are ventilated on all four corners, and the brake calipers are not some fancy 4-piston fixed design made by Brembo. Instead, they're just simple floating calipers. Mind you, the front ones are quite a bit bigger than the standard ones, but they still provide a lot of stopping power. When you're just driving around town, it doesn't take much force from your foot to bring the car to a complete stop, and the brake pedal itself has quite a firm feeling, so it inspires you to have that confidence if you need to really stomp on it in an emergency situation. As for the suspension, one of the biggest changes to the Elantra N, I'm not sure if the Kona N has this, because I haven't been able to find any information on it, but the Elantra N has what's called IDA, Integrated Drive Axle. So it's the axle, the wheel hub, and the wheel bearing all integrated into one unit. This reduces noise, it reduces the weight, and it allows for more lateral G-forces. However, I can't help but think that if, let's say at 100,000 or 150,000 kilometers, the wheel bearing goes, do you change the entire unit? Because that would be more expensive than just changing the wheel bearing itself. Again, I'm not sure exactly how Hyundai designed this, but that's just my assumption. Probably would have to change the entire unit. I could be wrong though, so let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. As well, both of these cars have adaptive dampers and they both have an electronic limited slip differential. In addition, they both also get quite a lot of body rigidity enhancements, with the Elantra N's being a bit more in your face. It has a bright red strut tower brace in the back. All of these changes and features provide both the Elantra N and the Kona N with a planted and sure-footed feeling when driving on twisty roads. The limited slip differential does wonders to pull the cars out of a corner under full throttle applications. No power is wasted with wheel spin like the Sonata N-Line. There is a little hint of torque steer with each car, but it's far more controlled than the hot hatches of a decade or two ago. The adaptive dampers have 3 different stiffness settings, and the steering itself can also be adjusted to provide more resistance when turning. Steering in both vehicles is direct and fast, but the Elantra N has a poor turning circle at 11.7 meters versus 10.2 meters for the Kona N. One feature that the Kona N has that the Elantra N doesn't have is the traction/terrain drive modes. These include snow, deep snow, mud, and sand. Now, these modes have me scratching my head a little bit because I cannot imagine a Kona N owner taking this sporty, street-oriented CUV on a sandy beach or on a muddy forest service road. I can see them slapping on some winter tires and driving it through snow during the winter, but in those other environments, I don't see it happening, especially considering that this Kona N is not available with an all-wheel drive system. So why even bother with those other drive modes? Again, snow, I can completely understand, but the other ones... But when the paved roads are dry, it's the Elantra N that is just a tiny bit sharper to drive than the Kona N thanks to its lower center of gravity and lighter weight. However, that's not to say that the Kona N isn't fun to drive either, because it is. With smooth throttle and steering inputs, both of these cars are quick and stable on a winding road. But if you lift off the throttle momentarily when entering a corner, the back end will begin to rotate. After which you can quickly reapply throttle and the eLSD will pull the cars through the corner and the chassis settles down again. Both of these cars are a hoot to drive, but I personally prefer the Elantra N over the Kona N. Now let's take a look at the inside of these two cars, and starting with the Kona N, it of course has more headroom than the Elantra N. But in the Elantra N, it's actually not that bad. I could even wear my helmet when I'm going to a racetrack, for example, and I still have just enough space. The helmet is not actually touching the headliner, even though this particular Elantra N has the optional sunroof. In terms of legroom, both of the cars are pretty similar, more than enough up here in the front, both in the Kona N and in the Elantra N. It's the back seats, though, that make the difference. Here in the Kona N, it is very tight behind my driving position. I feel very squished with my legs. Headroom is okay, as you would expect, but I would happily take more legroom. In the Elantra, it's the opposite. I actually have more legroom behind my own 6'4" driving position than in the Kona N. Again, headroom is very tight, but I would gladly take more legroom over headroom. And behind the seats, the Kona N of course has more cargo capacity than the Elantra N. Interestingly, the Kona N actually has less cargo capacity than the Veloster N. Bit of an oddity, but anyway. The back seats fold down in both cars, but in the Kona they fold 60-40, so you can carry longer items and still have enough space for a rear passenger. Whereas in the Elantra N, that backrest folds in one piece. And as you can see, the Elantra N also has that bright red strut tower brace, so you can really only fit really thin but long items, so maybe skis. Getting back to the front, in this Kona N, it looks very similar to the Kona N line, apart from the steering wheel, which of course has the two N buttons and the NGS mode. But everything else looks very similar. In the Elantra N, the only difference between it and its N line is the fact that the drive mode button is no longer on the left side and it is now just a generic button right next to the shifter or the gear selector in this automatic. But the biggest difference that you will notice between these two cars has to do with the seats. In this Kona N, they're comfortable and they do a good job of holding you in, but they just feel very generic and bland. Whereas in the Elantra N, they look very sharp. Of course, they hold you in really well, and I just love the way that these bucket seats look, especially with the illuminated N logo in the center. It would be nice if this Kona N had those exact same seats, but it doesn't. So, c'est la vie. Oh, and also one more thing that I forgot to mention. In the Kona N, the driver's seat is power operated, whereas in the Elantra N, it is manually adjustable. As you would expect, both of these vehicles have an overall stiffer ride than their more normal counterparts. But the adaptive dampers do their best to still provide a comfortable ride on city streets or highways. In normal mode, The ride is acceptable and it doesn't punish your back if you decide to take either of them to work on a daily basis. In the stiffest setting, the ride is much more jiggly, but strangely, it doesn't feel quite as jiggly as I remember it in the Veloster N. As for noises, wind noise is minimal in both, but road noise from the tires is a bit more evident on porous or concrete highways. However, one of the best noises that Hyundai N cars produce is exhaust noise. In the Elantra N, you can customize the augmented sounds that get played through the speaker system. You can choose between sporty, high performance, or TCR, which is Hyundai's touring car. You can also customize the sounds for a deeper bass or more whine and fine-tune the volume. Or you can just leave the system off and listen to the real thing, which is what you have to do in the Kona N because it doesn't have this feature. The 2022 Hyundai Elantra N starts at $37,199 Canadian with the 6-speed manual transmission. For the DCT, it'll cost you an additional $1,600 Canadian, or $1,500 American. The 2022 Hyundai Kona N costs $39,999 Canadian. The only options are the paint colors. For that money, both of these cars come similarly equipped and also very well equipped, I should add, but there are a few differences here and there. So in terms of similarities, they both have heated front seats, heated steering wheel, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, although they are both wired. They both have a native navigation system, automatic climate control, wireless phone charging, LED headlights, rear parking sensors, just a lot of the usual stuff that you would expect from a Hyundai vehicle. But the differences are, as I mentioned earlier, the seats are different. As well, the Elantra N has a sunroof, but that's only if you get it with the DCT automatic. If you get it with the manual, then it doesn't come with the sunroof. Also, the Kona N has a head-up display, whereas the Elantra N doesn't have it. It's one of those head-up displays where the glass rises from the dashboard, and personally, I do not like it. I much prefer the one that is projected on the actual windscreen. Also, the Elantra N comes with a dual-zone automatic climate control, whereas the Kona N is only a single-zone automatic climate control. Both have 10.25-inch infotainment touchscreens with the same infotainment system that is found on other Hyundai vehicles. The only difference is the addition of the N performance pages. These display various performance parameters such as throttle and brake applications, G-force, and lap times, to name a few. Speaking of lap times, there are a few pre-programmed tracks in the system, and you can set one of the two N steering wheel buttons to start or stop the lap timer. These performance pages also allow you to customize the N1 and N2 buttons, customize launch control and shift light RPMs, as well as activate track sense, power shift, and launch control modes. On the safety side of things, the IIHS gave the Elantra a top safety pick with good scores in the crash test, but good or poor scores for headlights depending on the trim level. But the Kona did not receive a top safety pick. However, it did still fare well in crash tests with good scores. The blemish comes from an acceptable score for the structure and safety cage. And finally, in Canada, the warranty for both vehicles is 5 years or 100,000 kilometers basic and powertrain. In the United States, they both have a 5-year or 60,000 mile basic and a 10-year or 100,000 mile powertrain warranty. I'm still not sure why in America you guys get such better powertrain coverage than us here in Canada. So between these two N models, which one do I prefer? That's easy. It's the Elantra N. This Kona N, although it is a lot of fun, it feels too much like a compromise. You're sitting much higher up and the whole car is much taller than the Elantra, so the center of gravity is higher and it just doesn't feel quite as sharp to drive as the Elantra N. Plus, the Elantra is available with a 6-speed manual transmission. It's got more space in the back seats, it's less expensive than this, and it's more fuel efficient. So that's the one that I would choose, and it's a good replacement for the Veloster N. But if you are interested in a Kona, then the one that you should be looking at is the Kona N line. It doesn't have quite as powerful of an engine as this one does, but it's still pretty peppy. It also comes with a dual clutch transmission, just like this one, although it's a different type of dual clutch transmission. And more importantly, it is available with all-wheel drive, whereas this one isn't. And of course, it is less expensive than this. So if you're interested in a Kona N-Line, if you're interested in an Elantra, Elantra N. And if you want to know more about either of these two cars or even the Kona N-Line, I wrote more detailed reviews of them over on my website. You can find those links in the video description or click on the pop-up banner right up here. And as always, I will see you in the next car or truck or most likely another SUV or crossover SUV. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.